Hi, I'm Cray with the International Water Training Institute on behalf of the Australian Water School. Welcome to our final webinar of 2023. We hope you'll join us for more water-related topics next year, but in the meantime, let's dive into today's topic, which is titled The Salt of the Earth. In particular, we'll be talking about the salt that has been dissolved in the planet's water bodies, how to take it back out, and what the future might hold for desalination in terms of climate change, water shortages, and increasing demands. We'll also be addressing how emerging technologies might help us reduce environmental impacts and power requirements, along with a number of other obstacles that have the potential to stand in the way of widespread application of desalination. So welcome, first of all, to our live global audience. Thanks so much for joining us today. Anytime we look at a world map like this with so much water all around us, all through human history, we've had to deal with the dichotomy of freshwater shortages and how rare a resource freshwater is in light of a planet's surface that's 70% covered in water. So we hope today's discussion will add to your knowledge around desalination and where the industry might be heading. We've got expert presenters and panelists coming to you from beautiful Western Australia today on the shores of the Indian Ocean, where desalination is a big part of life. We'll offer some case studies from Western Australia and other capital cities in Australia, and we hope the technologies and challenges that we'll discuss, in particular those challenges that have been overcome, will be helpful to attendees from right around the world, scalable to your own community's needs. So today's presenters, Neil Palmer, Gary Crisp. Also, we have our panelists with us, Sandra Henville and George Britton-Jones. Let's just go around the room, introduce yourselves. I understand we're all heavily Western Australia based today. We're all coming to you from the west side of Australia. And if you can just let us know how long you've been in the business of desalination, where you typically sit, if it's not Western Australia permanently, and what you're doing out here in Perth. Let's go in order I see here. George, then Sandra, then Gary, then Neil. So George, over to you first.
Hello, everyone. I'm ordinarily based in Adelaide, where I work for Osmoflow as a process engineer. So I've been in desalination for about 6 years, mostly working on difficult to treat water and brackish water. This week I'm in Perth for a conference for the Membrane Society of Australasia.
Awesome.
So that's me.
Great, good to hear. And George will be answering some questions in the chat line in the background. Sandra as well. Over to you, Sandra. Let's hear an introduction from you.
Hi, I'm Sandra Henville. I'm the WA Research Manager for Water Research Australia, based at the Water Corporation here in Western Australia. So this is my home. I have lots of friends visiting. And oh geez, I think I've been in the water industry 20 plus years.
Awesome. Okay, well, we'll look to draw on those insights from you. Gary, you're next. I think if I'm going left to right on my screen, let's hear an introduction from you.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Gary Crisp. I'm Chief Engineer at Sequana Partners. I've been in desalination. I've been dabbling in desalination since 1999, when I was asked by the Water Corp to prepare the strategy of desalination for Western Australia, and that carried on throughout Australia. I have 43 years of water experience. I started out in dams, but I saw the light in 99, and I realized that the future is going to be desalination for semi-arid countries and for other countries dealing with dyes and things they've got to clean up to put water back into the system. Thanks.
Excellent. Well, thanks for that. And in the same spot, we've got Neil Palmer.
Hi, I'm the Chief Technical Officer for Osmoflow, but my background includes probably half the career in government and half in the private sector, with a little stint in research, heading the National Centre. To be with you, Cray, and we look forward to the discussion.
All right, sounds good. Well, let's have a quick look at the poll results. For the poll results, quite a heavy contingent from government compared to what we normally see. But here's the couple of questions on number 2 and number 3 here, where we wanted to see, are you currently using desalinated water or reused water? And it looks like nearly split half and half between yes and no, and then a few don't know. So maybe you might want to check with your water utility and see if you actually are using it. And here is the key question then. This is the trending topic then. Yes, it looks like overwhelmingly the audience feels that our reliance on desalination will increase rather than decrease. And what are the obstacles that stand in the way? That's what we'll talk about today with Neil and Gary. Neil, is that what you expected to see? Did you expect to see 90% of the people looking toward an increase in desalination?
Well, no, but it's heartening to see.
Yeah, good. And let's find out about a few obstacles that stand in the way and some of the promises, the potential pitfalls. Neil, if you want to start sharing your screen already, over to you, Neil. I can see your screen just fine.
Thanks, Ray. This is a story about the 6 Australian desalination plants that were built in a period from 2004 to 2012, 2013, at a cost of around about $10 billion. And the subject of our talk is, this is a big investment. Was it worth it? So, Gary, over to you. You coined the phrase Big Six, which I think was based after a very powerful motor car from South Africa. Tell us about the plant.
So we start with the Perth Seawater Desalination Plant, PSDP, Perth 1. We needed water for Perth back in the early 2000s. This plant is 144 megalitres a day and produces 45 gigalitres per year. As I was saying, a gigaliter is 1 million cubic meters for those overseas. We commenced construction in 2005 and was completed in 2007, quite a record time. And it produced, at the time, 17% of Perth's water supply. Perth uses about 300 gigalitres a year, and this plant produces 45 gigalitres. Perth 2 was commenced shortly after that, and the first stage was completed in 2011, the second stage 2013, combined 300 megalitres a day, which is 100 gigalitres per year. Those plants were completed in 2011 and 13. Gold Coast was completed in 2009. It produces 133 megalitres a day, was completed in 2009. Sydney was completed in 2010. It's the first stage of Sydney, 250 megalitres a day. There's plans to double that into the future. Adelaide Desalination Plant, completed in 2012. It's got 2 stages or 2 components of 150 megalitres a day each, with a total of 100 gigalitres per year. And then there's Melbourne, which comprises 3 components, ultimately 4. Each component is 150 megalitres a day, and that was completed in 2012 as well. All of these plants won a Desal Plant of the Year by Global Water Intelligence, with Adelaide coming second because it had to compete against Melbourne, which was obviously the bigger plant.
The reason for the construction of this, or the investment of $10 billion in water security measures, was caused by the millennium drought. It actually went for 13 years, from 1997 to 2011. This shows the rainfall period for the desal 2001 to 2009. You can see much of southeastern Australia is dark red, which is lowest on record. Drought broke in 2011 with floods in eastern Australia, which coincided with the completion dates of some of the desalination plants. Here are the locations of the Big Six. So you can see they're spread, 2 in Perth and 1 in each of the mainland state capitals of Australia. If we move on, Perth's an interesting case study of climate change. Gary.
Okay, as you can see, the inflow, even though rainfall, the precipitation didn't reduce that much, inflow reduced dramatically. So as you can see, from the early 1900s or 1941 right down to present, the runoff has gone from an average of 500 gigalitres a year down to as little this recent year, 40. A few years ago, it was as low as 15 gigalitres. If you realize Perth uses 300 gigalitres a year and we only have 15 gigalitres flowing in, we've got a problem. So you can see in the 70s, they started bringing in groundwater because they could drill to deeper depth and access deep groundwater, a kilometre below ground level. And in time, that was also depleting due to climate change, and also demand was increasing. So in the early 2000s, along came desalination, which you can see in the orange color. And then more recently, a very small component is also groundwater replenishment, which is also a form of desalination. It's just brackish water desalination. We're hoping that with the new plant being about to be constructed at Alkimos, by 2028, almost 60% of Perth's water will be from desalination. And when they do the second stage of that, or whatever comes next, we'd have up to 75% of Perth's water from seawater desalination.
Perth's been a leader in potable water reuse, indirect potable reuse. Gary, how much each year is contributed by potable water reuse?
So, potable water reuse, there's a lot of reuse for public open spaces and things like that, which is not for potable or for drinking water. But in recent years, our Beanyap groundwater recharge system was brought into being. It produces, it's ultimately going to produce about 28 gigaliters a year. I think at the moment it's producing about 24 gigaliters. That gets injected into 2 aquifers and then re-abstracted. That caters for one of our water recovery plants. It's a new name for wastewater recovery plants, and is up in the north of Perth. There are plans to look at further plants, but we do find that the expense of aquifer recharge or trying to get it back in the ground can be complex. They're looking at indirect potable reuse, which means pumping it up to the reservoirs in the hills, the dams. That's also fairly expensive because of the energy costs for pumping and also for the additional treatment you need, including ozonation, to make sure that the water quality is up to standard. So it's going to happen, but not as fast as originally predicted. I think seawater desal is the actual easier option, and even if it's slightly more energy intensive, I don't believe it's more expensive.
Yeah, we'll come back to that, Gary, because a decision was made in the last couple of years to go for the Alkimos seawater desal plant. So we'll come back to that. I just want to talk about a case study in Melbourne. Melbourne desalination plant was built. It basically languished for 5 years after commissioning without being used. It's quite large, 150 gigalitres a year. It's about a third of Melbourne's annual average water demand. Now, in 2017, we had an interesting severe drought for 3 years, 2017 to 2019. But we'll come back to that in a moment. I've got some theoretical work which showed what would have happened. The first chart on the left shows what would have happened if there'd been no water restrictions. During the millennium drought, it would have run out of water by about 2009. The actual results in that period, 2003 to 2009, the very severe water restrictions. Melbourne maintained some water in the dams. No extremely severe water restrictions. And then in the red box, here's a prediction which we did based on, had the desalination plant been available, the dams could have maintained their level without restrictions. It's a very powerful water security device that's been employed. Now, we'll talk about the cost of it later on, but I just wanted to go through that exercise. Now, it wasn't available at the time. Now, here was a real exercise. In 2017, there was another drought, and you can see in Eastern Australia, lowest on record again. And in terms of severity, it was more severe than the millennium drought in terms of intensity. So what happened in Melbourne during this period? So instead of water restrictions in 2018, 19 and 19, 20, they fired up the desalination plant, which ran at about 83% for 3 years. And you can see on the photos, Thomson Dam is the principal water supply for Melbourne, and the Victorian desalination plant. So dam levels at the end of 2022 were 92%. It's been predicted without the desalination plant, there would have been at 69%, but restrictions would have been applied. So it did what it was supposed to do. It's like an insurance policy. You pay for insurance. You don't ever complain if you don't have a claim on it. In this case, we operated the desalination plant in Victoria, and it continued to be one of the world's most livable cities, which is not the case if you've got severe water restrictions frequently, which is the case in the past. Just a note on the size of it. As Gary said, the capacity is 150 gigalitres a year. You can see the hydrograph from Thomson Dam inflows from 1984 to 2021, and there's been a substantial decrease of about 100 gigalitres a year due to rainfall and runoff changes. So it's now about 192 gigalitres a year. A safe yield from that is roughly equivalent to the seawater desalination, the Victorian desalination plant. If we move on, here's an update of what's likely to happen in the next 10 years in desalination in Australia. We work down from the Sunshine Coast desal plant, which has been announced as a serious contender by the Premier of Queensland. You probably know there's a large recycling system in Queensland, the Western Corridor replacement flows. It's worth 232 megalitres a day, but they're reluctant because of the, I guess, generally the yuck factor to implement it. Don't know what will happen. Belmont Desalination Plant is currently being approved and will be designed in 2024. Sydney Desalination Plant, it's been announced that there will be an expansion, a doubling the size of it, which it was originally equipped to do. Victorian Desalination Plant, the next water supply for Melbourne is an expansion of Vic Desalination Plant by another 150 megalitres a day. In South Australia, the Northern Water Supply, 260 megalitres a day, has been announced and will be proceeding, I think, in 2025, which will take water from Eyre Peninsula north to the mines of Olympic Dam, principally to reduce their dependence on Great Artesian Basin water. This is part of a hydrogen initiative for the South Australian government and will be completely renewably powered. Then we've got the Alkimos desalination plant. And Gary, perhaps you can talk about the decision that led to that.
Yeah, well, so first of all, Alkimos, I see we've got 250 megalitres, actually 300 megalitres a day in two stages of 150. There are plans. In fact, the Water Corp is very, very proactive. So it's got plans for two desalination plants. One was a second plant adjacent to the existing Kwinana desal plant, also two stages of 150 megalitres a day. But the water was more urgently needed in the northern suburbs because in 2028, the Department of Water and Environment are going to be removing 30 gigalitres of allocation from the groundwater, the Yarragadee allocation. And so this plant that they're going to be building from next year, it's going to take 4 years. It has to be in place by July 28. To cater for that 30 gigalitres they're going to lose, plus another 20 gigalitres for growth in the northern suburbs. Ultimately, that plant will be doubled. I suspect by 2032 it could be doubled. The second stage doesn't take as long because all the tunnels and the infalls and outfalls are completed. But what is complex for the second stage is bringing water into Perth because there's no dams in the northern suburbs, so they cannot use them as storage. They've got to bring the water south to a big man-made reservoir and then pump that water into the hills storages in time. And then ultimately they will duplicate or triplicate Perth 1, which is PSDP in Kwinana. And there's plans afoot for others deep into the future. There's also some plans, and I'll get into that later, on water recycling.
Okay, but the important thing on this one is the decision was made, and at this stage, the technology favoured seawater desalination over water recycling. Okay. This is just a list of those plants that we went through. You can see that in Australia, the expected increase in seawater desalinations over the current Big Six is 65%. So I guess the policymakers and water utilities in Australia are saying that this is basically the way of the future to ensure water supply in the face of climate change and increasing demand through population growth. This also takes into account water efficiency measures, but we're still with growth in population. There's an increase in demand that occurs. If we look at some innovative types of technology that's being applied now. So Gary, back to you.
Yeah, okay. And the reason we chose this slide is Neil mentioned earlier on in our pre-discussions about California being very strict on intakes, the abstraction of lava and pulling in lava and sea life into the intake. So in California, they're very strict on that. They cannot have open intakes, which we have, which is a velocity cap intake, or even a Johnson screen. They believe they caused impingement and entrainment. So they've come up with this slant well system, and this is going to be, and it's currently being contracted as we speak, even though they have been trialing it for about 15 years. It's at a suburb in California, Southern California, called Dana Point. It's going to be called the Doheny Desalination Plant, and this slant well goes into the sea. Initially, it's going to be pulling in some fresh water, so the plant's going to be designed to manage a mix of brackish and seawater, and ultimately pure seawater. So that's one way of getting around the very strict EPA regulations on open intakes. So that's one option. And I know the Water Corp is looking at those solutions for some of the smaller plants they're planning up and down our coast here. We know that ultrafiltration has become fairly well established in pre-treatment. It's not that new anymore, but I've just put it down as the option moves away in places away from conventional dual media filters and gravity filters or pressured media filters to ultrafiltration. But this is my segue into the next slide, which is, I believe, where we're going to end up into the future, and that's ceramic membranes for seawater pre-treatment. They've already been used for lots of applications in the food industry and in water treatment, but not so much for seawater desal yet, but there are moves afoot. We go to the next slide. The one we saw before this was just monolithic ceramic membranes. The other one is flat sheet membranes. I think these are coming into being. I think they're about to be contracted for their first big plant. They've recently just retrofitted a surface water treatment plant in India that was 40 megalitres a day, and now in the same footprint, using the same basin, it's 160 megalitres a day. Water gets actually vacuumed through the ceramic membrane, and they're pretty easy to clean. So if we go to the next slide. So the belief is that when ceramic membranes come into being, all those processes that are in that window can be removed, and you can just have ceramic membranes. You don't need the dissolved air flotation up front, or any kind of settlers or filters or cartridge filters. You can go straight to ceramic membranes, and they're so fine and so robust that hopefully the membrane suppliers will not require cartridge filters upstream of their membranes.
Just want to touch on renewable energy. In Australia, there are a couple of large projects. This is called the Asian Renewable Energy Hub. You can see it's in northwest Western Australia, with the intention of having a huge site, 6,500 square kilometres north of the Pilbara, 26 gigawatts of solar and wind power. And to give you an idea of the scale of that, that's about a third of the whole generating capacity in Australia at the moment. 1.6 million tonnes of green hydrogen, 9 million tonnes of green ammonia, and it'll abate 17 million tonnes of carbon per year. This is a huge scheme, very ambitious, but one of the stakeholders now is BP, so it's got the serious oil, big oil behind it, but it needs 80 gigalitres a year of demineralised water. So there'll be an important increase in the need for pure water for these hydrogen initiatives. Another one in South Australia is called the Port Bonython Export Hub, and you can see the size of this in northern Spencer Gulf. Once again, number of projects shortlisted. The world's largest hydrolyser is being constructed here as a South Australian government initiative. $13 billion of investment and producing 1.8 million tonnes of hydrogen by 2030. Once again, will require demineralised water for the hydrogen supply. So there's a couple of examples of, I think, different projects in the future, in addition to the current desalination initiatives that have been taken in Australia, plus the increase is expected in the next 10 years. Now, we touch on the price. I did an exercise in South Australia of the water rates from 2008, before the desal plant, to 2015, after the desal plant, and the net effect was $7.22 per week per household. If you look at the price of beer, here's a Fat Yak Pale Ale at the time in 2015. So the cost of water security in Adelaide is equivalent to 1 glass of beer per household per week. I guess you can ask people, are they prepared to pay 1 glass of beer per household per week for absolute water security? And And I think the answer in most situations would be yes. So to finish off, there's no shortage of water on Earth, but fresh water is limited. If you look from space, 75% of the planet's covered with water. We can convert it to fresh water. The strategic investment of $10 billion in major seawater has brought affordable water security to Australia's 5 mainland capitals. And a planned 65% increase over the next 10 years suggests the initial investment was well justified. And with that, we thank you for your attention. We'd be happy to take some questions.
All right, let's have a brief panel discussion now about some of the implications. There have been some tremendous questions coming in. Sandra and George have been busy answering those. So maybe Neil and Gary, if you get a chance to just go through the Q&A line, see if there's any that you would like to address. We'll come back to you shortly. But let's go with George. I know you've been answering frantically some of these questions in the background about the environmental impacts. So let's start with George. If you just let us know, since those watching the YouTube recording won't see the questions that have been typed in, if you can just let the audience know what those questions were and what your responses have been so far.
Sure, yeah, I've been doing my best to answer questions as they've come in. There's been a few about brine discharge from desalination plants, particularly around the chemistry of the brine, which is effectively just seawater at twice the concentration returned to the sea. Questions around how exactly it is discharged, which is typically through a jet diffuser designed to mix the brine back into the seawater as quickly as possible. And from my understanding, what we see at the major desalination plants in Australia is the mixing is very rapid, and you do see actually a greater growth of coral, or actually a productive marine environment at the brine discharge. There's no evidence, no clear evidence of environmental damage from the brine the way it is discharged. There was, I think, another question alluding to CIP solutions, which use chemicals in desal plants. However, the cleaning is quite infrequent. It's a very small volume, and it's diluted in that outflow.
Awesome. Well, thanks for answering those questions. Keep some of those coming from the audience. Sandra, over to you. You've described yourself as a bit of a generalist with these things. We're talking about really big plants here, multi-billion-dollar investments. Do you see some of the technology that is coming on board here and that's been gained in the process of developing these plants being scalable, say out to remote areas? Do you see that? Do you see those sorts of applications increasing in their breadth and scope and scale, and really the percentage of water security that now is is currently available? Do you see that increasing for desalination in remote communities as well?
Yes, I do. And look, there are already many examples of desal, like small-scale desal in play. I mean, people sailing around the world on yachts already have small water makers in their yachts. It's entirely possible. We've had a project going at the Water Corporation for a little while, where we've been looking at putting small-scale desal plants on farmlands. So for those who live in Australia, and I'm sure this is a problem in other parts of the world as well, due to past clearing practices and changed meteorological patterns, we do have a major problem with salinity in the wheat belt, and so farmers or remote communities who are becoming more increasingly reliant on groundwater are finding that the salinity levels are rising. So we have been experimenting with small scale desal. The issue is the brine, and how do you responsibly discharge the brine? Fortunately, the aquifers are fairly salty already, and sometimes the option is to, recharge the what do they call it, the reject water back down the borehole. I know back in the day they used to use some salt pans. That's the real issue. And also yesterday I was listening to a fabulous presentation about an Aboriginal community, and I was a little shocked to see that the percentage of reject water was really very high. It was about 70% for this community. So it's about thinking of the desal plant as one component in that overall water cycle, and really thinking about an integrated approach to how you integrate the technology into the broader picture of water use in a community, whether it's a farm, it's a community, or what it is.
Oh, thanks.
The
Thanks.
technology is easy, right? It's if you think of people, process, information, and technology, tech's last. It's people and process that we've really got to nail.
Okay. Well, no, thanks for those insights. Again, a lot of
opinion.
Yes. No, thanks for that. That's what we're looking for, based on your 20 years of experience in the industry. Because if you look at that map of the attendees, all straight around the planet, there are places, areas where putting in $1 billion plant is just not going to be an option. Can we scale these things down? And you're right. If a yacht can can desalinate water, then why not a remote community? And we certainly have those issues here in Australia, even inland, where there is no discharge out to the ocean, and some of the questions coming in about environmental impacts to the plant species when you discharge that brine are very well taken. Let's see if we can get the experts, our panelists, to respond to some of those in writing. Over to you, Gary and Neil. Let's, if you've had a chance in the meantime to have a look at the questions, preferably focused on those that have been most upvoted. I'll just turn it over to you, Gary, first, and then Neil, maybe pick one of the questions of the many questions that have been coming in so far that you'd like to address live.
Okay, well, I'll start with this question from Ben. I'm talking about, is there a consideration by water authorities to use floating evaporation mitigation devices on dam storage to improve water security? I know they've done a lot of this in California with those little black, they look like ping pong balls, a bit bigger than ping pong balls, floating on the surface. The Water Corporation at one stage did look at that, but if you consider where we are here, the evaporation component and the small component of surface water going to Perth for drinking water, it was not really worth the effort. We built desal plants instead. I know we have evaporation, but the evaporation component is relatively small, and we utilize the dams that we do put water into from the desal plants. We are high level and pretty low evaporation. So we have considered it, but it hasn't been practical. On to the second question. How far does the effective brine on seawater extend, distance from the outfall? That's a great question. So I think the EPA throughout Australia has a rule that within 50 meters of the jet, the water has to be back to background levels. So if you look at PSDP, Perth Seawater Desal Plant, I think its discharged line is 200 meters long with jets every 20 meters, no, every 5 meters. So you've got a section that's 200 meters long and 50 meters on each side. So it's 200 by 100 meters and you're back to background levels. So it's a patch that's 200 meters long and 100 meters wide, and the water on each side of that is normal. So it does disperse.
With the Kwinana plant, Gary, what's the environmental scorecard?
Look, there's been a lot of assessment done, and they assessed it for many years afterwards. There's a really good report that I can provide, done by Veronica Bonnelet of Sewers and one of my Water Corp colleagues, a bit of a blockage, that proved that they could not tell the difference between Coburn Sound's water quality before and after the desal plant. So its score is pretty high. They do sometimes stop running the plant in, I think, September, a few weeks in September, because the dissolved oxygen levels go below those that are set, or below those that are set. But they have found even in nature it's the same. So it's not the desal plant. the levels were set lower than the natural levels. So that's the only issue they have with the desal plant is oxygen levels.
All right, Neil. Any comments from you? And I guess I'll start with one question here that came up that I'm not sure of the answer to, and that's the cost of firing things up and then shutting back down again. Is it best to just run them continuously for a while, or only wait when the dams are lower, and run? What are the requirements or the considerations in terms of once you fire up, you want to just keep running for a certain amount of time versus starting it back up again, every couple of days? Any thoughts on that? And then any other questions that you see here that you wanted to address?
Yeah, clearly with the capital cost, the most efficient way of operating it to reduce the cost is to have it running full-time, 100%, 24/7, which is basically what's happening in Perth. In the other cities, they haven't used them, so they've basically paid for the desalination, including generally O&M, as part of the availability charge by the generally the private operators that are operating the desal plants. And then in the case of Adelaide, for instance, when it fires up, you've got the additional cost of chemicals and energy. There was a question about renewables. All of the Australian plants offset their energy use by purchasing renewable power. So technically, they're all powered renewably, but of course, you've got the renewable energy is not always available. So the offset scheme is designed to make sure that whatever energy is used in the desal plant is offset by purchase of renewable energy. But getting back to the operation, the Newcastle plant, I think, is a change. It was approved last year, which is one of the wettest years on record. And we used to have this hydro-illogical cycle where, drought, panic, and then it rains and we go back into apathy. But that seems to be coming out of that because that was approved. It's proceeding ahead. It's relatively modest, 30 megalitres a day. And I think the intention is to run it basically as a baseload plant. So that will give the folks of Newcastle security by using the desal plant as a baseload plant. And of course, then you keep the water in the bank, in the dams, available for when the emergency comes. It is a pretty powerful, as I showed in the Melbourne, the Vic desal plant example. If you've got a constant flow that's climate resilient or climate independent, it makes a huge difference to your water security availability. So yes, if we can operate them full time, and I think as time goes on and climate change and population growth, these plants will be used more and more.
Great. And those are some questions that have come up related to climate change, and you may want to answer those in a little more detail on in the chat line. A few other questions coming up. If anybody wants to jump in on the question of water reuse versus seawater desalination, I'm sure the cost implications vary by location, but in general, the cost of taking wastewater, treating it, pumping it back up stream and reusing it again versus desalination in terms of power consumption. That's those sorts of costs. If anybody wants to weigh in on that, feel free.
Okay, Gary. Yeah. Oh, did you want to go, Sandra? You go ahead.
I'll say the general thing. You can say the specifics. But I mean, this is a constant pushback, I guess you would call it, that I hear in WA, Western Australia. The cost of desal is just so high. One of the things the Water Corporation are doing is we're actually going into wind farming as an offset to help power the plants with renewable energy. But you look at Perth, and Gary can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's very much, it's less than 5% reliance on surface water. This simply isn't runoff into the dam. Yesterday, I was looking at a wonderful presentation about Perth's groundwater and just the amount of work that goes into balancing abstraction so that we don't create any environmental damage through further acidification of water or whatever it is that impacting wetlands. So Perth has ended up in this situation where We are predominantly desalinated water, followed by groundwater and tiny, tiny amount of surface water. So, it's quite a conundrum. What do you do when you're in that situation? So we've had to think pretty carefully about that water energy nexus. Not sure if that term's still used, but really closing that loop between energy use and water use. We are the biggest energy user in the state.
Mm-hmm.
So
that puts things in perspective. I didn't realize that. Largest energy user in the state. Wow. Gary, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, one of the reasons reuse has not been pushed as hard as we would like to have had it pushed. First of all, there's not that much water to recycle, so you still need a source of water. So if you keep recycling forever, eventually it's going to dwindle, because you're only getting a 68% recovery from when it goes from your toilet into the wastewater treatment plant and through the system. So the recovery is 68%. The RO component is about 80%, but the water from the toilet to the tap is 68%. And it's brilliant. There's nothing wrong with that water. It's high quality and everything, but the cost is not as low as everyone thinks it is, especially if you do aquifer storage or aquifer recharge, which we do here in the west at Beanyap, because you've got to still treat it and then put it back in the ground and then take it back out the ground. And all of that uses energy. I'm not saying the energy is the same as seawater desal, but it's not very much further off. The other options the Water Corp was looking at is indirect potable reuse, which is putting the water up in the hills reservoirs. And first of all, the capital cost was amazingly high, because you've got to first do the treatment, and then you've got to build a tunnel or a pipeline to the hills, and then you've got to pump the water, and you've got to do additional treatment as well, such as ozonation, to make sure the water quality is right. So when you add all of those up, it's probably getting to about 80% of the energy used for seawater desal, and seawater desal is unlimited. So they will come in time, and they are in the program to be done, but they're only going to produce about 50 gigs of water, and Perth needs hundreds of gigs of water. So they'll happen in time as needed. Obviously, a lot of water recycling occurs for public open spaces and playing fields and that, where it's not so treated to such an advanced level. And that's where I think a good solution to go for keeping the city green.
Perfect. Okay. And we'll refer back. We'll put some of these resources in the links on YouTube that you can refer to, including some of these studies that have been referenced, and a few of the items with additional information, including a few previous webinars that Neil has done for the Australian Water School about 5-6 years ago. One of the webinars I wanted to refer back to was on marine energy, and that's from just last month or two. We had some presentations about portable units that harness marine energy, whether it's from waves or tides or currents, and using that energy that's harvested renewably, I guess, from the waves, and using that to power portable desalination units. So that's something that is an emerging technology that may be promising in the future. George, if you could comment a little bit on one of the things that you mentioned here in response to a question about beneficial uses potentially for brine mining. There's a lot of areas along the coast of Western Australia where we, put the brine in there and extract out some things of value. If you want to follow up on that comment and just pass that along to the audience as well. Yeah,
sure. I think the question was asking about obtaining salt from seawater desalination brine. As I mentioned, the brine comes out at twice the concentration roughly of seawater. To actually get to a level of crystallization, you still need to concentrate the seawater much, much further, which means you do require a lot more energy to do that again, which is why it hasn't been practiced in the past. But there's definitely a lot of companies working on making concentration of the brine even further more energy efficient and reducing that barrier. In addition to that, to extract other minerals from the brine is not necessarily a matter of concentrating it further. and the particular minerals that people are looking at either have to be of extremely high value or they have to be reasonably well concentrated in the brine. So lithium is very high value. The world needs a lot more lithium, but in seawater brine, it's still in a low concentration. But it is one that certainly comes up and has some interest. Rubidium's another, which is incredibly rare, but it has particular uses in advanced technology as well. Magnesium's also very common. There's a lot of demand for magnesium, and it's in higher concentrations in seawater brine.
Perfect. Okay. Well, a lot of the examples we've seen here are from Australia, but as I mentioned, scalable to any parts of the world. We wanted to show you some case studies here that are applicable as the Australian Water School. We do highlight a lot of things, examples from Australia, but they do have a worldwide implications and applications as well. Now, the Australian Water School is celebrating its 10-year anniversary. 10 years from now, maybe we'll do another webinar on desalination and see where we've come. Sandra, as a generalist, what would you expect if we're doing a webinar on desalination 10 years from now? Any expectations for things that might have changed in the meantime? Talk about climate change or new technologies. Where would you expect us to go from here if we were to focus on this topic again 10 years from now?
Oh, I would expect to be seeing some wonderful research around circular economy and closing that energy, bringing that energy and water cycle together. And I'd also love to see us in that circular economy vein. I'd love to see us making the best use of that brine discharge.
Yeah.
Extracting, being able to extract the valuable components of brine for reuse and having that look cost effective, because at the moment it's just a really hard nut to crack. I would love to see that as small scale.
Yeah.
I've often thought, wow, I see farmers buying blocks and blocks of stock lick or having a use for salt. It would be wonderful to see that those some low-cost solutions that the everyday farmer or landholder can maintain in an easy way and derive a benefit. Yeah.
Yeah, back over to Gary and Neil. It's been great to hear your presentations. If you just want to, again, grab one of the topics that you've seen here on the Q&A line, I'll let you just pick the ones. There are so many to pick from. Thanks so much to the audience for submitting these questions. We unfortunately can't get to all of them. We'll try to answer what we can and potentially maybe put some of them in writing back in the resources that would be available to attendees to click on through the YouTube link at the end. In the meantime, though, first Gary, then Neil, just grab one of those questions that you think is most relevant to the global audience we've got here, and let us know your response.
Yeah, the one that seems to come up and is of interest is the technology, the future, the cost of desalination. Just to put it in perspective, in the Middle East, there are very large membrane reverse osmosis desalination plants. They're very competitively bid, and they're generally issued on the base of a 25-year water purchase agreement. So the proponent builds the plant and operates it for 25 years and sells the water. So the contract is really to buy water, not to buy a desalination plant. And the competitive price is pretty much about 40 cents US per kilolitre. That's sort of about 60 cents Australian. That's the total cost, financing, chemicals, energy, labour, everything involved in it. So that's, I guess, the best practice in the world. Gary, I think, touched on the technology of continuous improvement in membrane performance and in pre-treat. Perhaps if you can take that up, because there's not going to be a quantum change or drop in desalination, but there's been gradual increases over the years that have been really phenomenal. Gary?
Yeah, I think it's asymptotic now, the development of desal, especially energy use or any specific energy consumption. They've got it down to about 2 kilowatt hours per cubic meter for the first pass of a desal plant. They are trying to get it lower, but there's a thermodynamic cutoff, and it's just virtually impossible. You can make it super low by making the plant massive and making the recovery only 10%. A normal desal plant recovers 45%. So that means that you concentrate in the salts to double the seawater, and that's the osmotic pressure you've got to overcome. So if you're only taking out 10%, you're only increasing the salinity by 10%. So your energy comes right down. So there's economies of scale. They've done a lot of optimizing of desal plant recovery sizes. So if you have a 20% recovery plant, it'll only use half the energy of a current plant, but the capital cost will be double. And that's why this company that's looking at deep sea desal, putting the desal plant under the ocean to take advantage of the pressure. The big advantage of that isn't the fact that they recoup in the energy, because the energy recovery device can do that. The advantage of that is that they make them so big that first of all, there's no biofouling or anything because they're so deep. But the other thing is, because they've got such a low flux and such a low recovery, they don't use much energy. So there's that front. I think pre-treatment is going to come a bit further. We've got to solve all the biofouling into the future. We've got to try and reduce the chemical consumptions. Perhaps there's going to be ways of potabilizing the water in a more simple way. In the Middle East, they use calcite, which is just trickling water through limestone. Seems to work pretty well there. But I think we're not going to get much more efficient. The materials will improve. It's all about getting the energy right and making sure we've got the right mix of renewable energy to power these plants. But they certainly are, to me, more environmentally friendly than building a dam or sucking the water out of the ground if you're using renewable energy. Just another thing I wanted to mention on the recycling, I forgot to mention, direct potable reuse is a lot cheaper, but it's to get people to be prepared to direct potably reuse the water, as they do in Windhoek in Namibia and in a few places in Texas. But I think America is moving forward very fast on direct potable reuse, and no doubt it'll happen here. And that will bring the cost and the energy down somewhat, but not massively.
Well, maybe we need to, I think you used the term toilet to tap, which we need to make sure we stay away from, because that's the yuck factor you talked about, even if it ends up better quality water in the end in your tap. So yeah, there are some issues to overcome. Let's just go around the room and have everybody just offer some closing remarks. Thanks so much to our expert presenters for coming on. Thanks to the attendees. Thanks so much for everybody's presentations and for the discussion here at the end. You'll see some slides coming up here as we are about to exit with some additional resources, some courses that are still available for you to subscribe to and to take. And let us know, what do you want to see more of next year? So back around the room, just offer some closing remarks on desalination, the future, the prospects, the implications here. Let's just go around and have you offer your closing remarks. Let's start with George, then over to Sandra, and we'll have Gary and Neil close it up. So George, over to you.
Thanks, Craig. One thing that's actually come to mind, I'll mention quickly, is the possibility, new technologies of sequestering carbon dioxide in seawater brine, which is a way to make the whole process more environmentally friendly, given the desal plant consumes energy itself. So I'll leave it there. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, a lot of new terms that I haven't heard, deep sea desalination and things like that, putting these things out there. That's what we want to do with the water school. Let's get that technology and the research out there. We'll put some of these papers out there as well that are relevant. And, maybe somebody will come up with some brand new technology where when we do our next 10-year anniversary, we'll have some additional new research that we can present that we might not have thought about so far. Sandra, closing remarks from you.
I should have said at the beginning, Kaya Wanju Wanju Nunukot, which means hello, welcome, because I'm sitting on Noongar Whadjuk country, and I guess for me it's all about the people and the community development application of these technologies, and that is what I would like to see a lot more of: good scaled down solutions that can solve local problems. The other thing I would like to say is there is a wealth of resources on the Water Research Australia website. So please dive in. And if you can't find what you're looking for, email me. I'll hunt it out.
Perfect. Yes, you are and you've got a great wealth of knowledge in terms of the research. So yes, let's take advantage of that. Gary, over to you, and then we'll have Neil close it up.
I was just going to say, desal's here forever, so watch this spot. I think it's going to be a major influence in the world, and definitely not going away.
All right, perfect. Neil, bring it home for us.
Thanks. I work in technology. One of the most wonderful things is to take bad water and make it into fresh water, because if people have fresh water, you've got options, you've got lifestyle, you've got well-being. So I think it keeps us getting out of bed in the morning, and it's been a pleasure to be able to talk with you. Thanks, Brian.
All right. Thanks. We hope to have you back on again for some more insights into future developments. Thanks for our all WA. You can't tell from my accent, but we're all sitting here in Western Australia, out overlooking the Indian Ocean here. And to from all of us here to all of you around the world attending, thanks for your participation. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for the insights and the dialogue and the opportunity that we get to be able to interact with you. It certainly is a pleasure and a privilege. So with that, we'll close it off. Our last final webinar for 2023. Let us know what you want to hear more of in 2024. We wish you all a festive end of the year, and we will look forward to interacting with you again next year with the Australian Water School. Thank you. Goodbye.